Hello friends, Jennifer Pearson here, Thistle Gypsy, and this is a video for people who read their own cards and have more than one deck. And even, I would say, for people who have a penchant for evaluating their decks. So I recently did the Vampire's Kiss, well, actually I didn't do the Vampire's Kiss spread. I did my own vampire spread on my birthday, prompted by Vampire's Kiss spread in the 365 Tarot Spreads book. And one of the things is I was doing is I was like, I don't know if I have, what's my dark deck? What's my darkest deck? And so what I went with initially was, and I don't have that on here. Oh, the Universal Fantasy. Oh, yes, it is. Okay, the Universal Fantasy Tarot. And then after I did it, I thought, I don't think that's my. I need to think again, And so it was really interesting to go back and try, like with the Fairy Ring, Fairy's Ring oracle cards, which have suits, etc., and some pretty slippery characters. In fact, a lot of slippery characters. So. And then I went through, and this was an interesting discovery. I went through through it also with the Lord of the Rings oracle, and that's a pretty dark deck. Actually, that's a pretty shadowy deck. So, which makes sense. I just hadn't really thought of it, but so like. How can I share my darkness without harming others? And I got the Black Riders. Anybody who knows Lord of the Rings, okay. What is draining me? The elves. What darkness would it be healthy for me to embrace? The 7 Palantiri. So it was really interesting. What strangeness secretly thrills me? The Great Sea. So it was an interesting way to kind of get to know the darkness of certain decks, I guess you would say. And then I have, when I was feeling challenged by the Chrysalis Tarot and having some difficulties deciding whether I was on board with it or not, and I had come up with 7 questions, and had pulled from the Chrysalis Tarot, and it was intended to be questions that catered to the outlook of the Chrysalis Tarot in terms of personal growth and transformation. And so I did those things with the Chrysalis Tarot, and then I think when I was done with that experiment, I said, well, now I'm maybe on more on board with it than I had been. But then it occurred to me, well, maybe with these questions, things like something eternal or constant about me, something hidden about me that I treasure, something I need to bring into the light and share, those kinds of questions. I thought, well, okay, so the Chrysalis Tarot is fine for that. But do I have other decks that are just as good? Just like when I was looking at the dark stuff, and I thought, oh well, and really my questions are not terribly dark here, but so it brought that up. Let's just say that this questioning of, okay, is this so this deck can do some of this thing that it purports to do, but are there other decks that do it just as well? in particular that do it just as well for me. In other words, decks that seem to respond particularly to me and who I am. And so my question for other readers is, do you do this? Do you have any sort of, other than a deck interview spread, which I think is different, that's kind of a getting to know the deck in one way, but if you have like test spreads to see what a deck is particularly good at or not good at, you know, like for personal development, I was interested to find that the Shapeshifter Tarot, which I just kind of did as a lark. I thought, oh well, you know, I got the Shapeshifter and I've never tried it, so I thought, oh, let's try that. And it gave some interesting responses. And I did the Wildwood, and it was, it was okay. The Universal Fantasy Tarot seemed to give me some good answers. And I tried the Lord of the Rings with this too, and it was also interesting. And then, so there's that aspect. So there's that aspect that I'm asking. Does anybody have like what I would call kind of tester questions, or a tester spread to see, is this a good deck for love? Is this a good deck for shadow work? Is this a good deck for, or do you just kind of go off your general instinct? Is this a good deck for general personal development questions? Is this a good deck for career? I mean, some of them are really obvious, like the baseball tarot to me is just like 100% career. It's a career deck for me. And some of them just strike me as very general. But doing these exercises and doing the multiple decks with them has just brought up that question. And so I have one more question for those of you who read your own cards and have more than one deck. Do you, when you have a question, a series of questions, maybe, I could see doing this maybe annually. Here I was just kind of doing it as a lark, or just again to say, all right, so Chrysalis Tarot does okay with this, but do I have decks that actually do better or the same as? And in other words, do I need the Chrysalis Tarot, or is it superfluous? And so I did a draw, or an intentional like face up draw here. Then I drew blind from the Chrysalis Tarot. And then I did the Shapeshifter, the Wildwood, the Universal Fantasy, and the Lord of the Rings. And the Lord of the Rings is kind of, we can leave that off there. We're not going to discuss that too much. But one of the interesting things that I found when I did this is the things that were repeating. Like for what am I dealing with right now, I have the Ace of Stones from the Chrysalis and the Ace of Stones from the Wildwood, and they look almost exactly the same. And then I have Justice and Justice. Justice from the Shapeshifter, which is called Nature, and then Justice from the Universal Fantasy. And I just found that really interesting. There were some other the major arcanas that have turned up in terms of what is a gift you give the world. They're not the same major arcanas, but they were, they are major arcanas. I thought there was another one, the Five, oh here it is, the Five of Wands, and the Five of what is called Swords in the Shapeshifter, but it is fire element, they've changed the wands and the swords around in terms of element. So it's actually the 5 of fire, 5 of wands were the same in a solution to the Justice, Ace of Stones, which is, it has me a little baffled, but there we go. So has anybody done this sort of thing where you have a set of questions and you pull from multiple decks? So it's kind of like, I guess it's kind of like a layered reading. And of course we do that from time to time, but this is like excessively layered, just to see how much synchronicity there is between the decks, as far as giving you the same or similar messages. And so I think that's it. So I hope some of you provide some perspective on this. Again, whether you have any kind of tester spread just to see, or spreads, could be more than one, to see what a deck is good for, if it seems to work well for a certain kind of reading. And then the other question, I think, is an automatic yes, because I was just thinking, all right, so this is just like a layered, spread. You know, doing a layered, and I think most of us who've done it, if you've got multiple decks, you do that. But it gets a little messy, so we don't do it a lot, right? I make these grids to kind of more for client readings, recording client readings, or for my own for that matter. But I ended up using it like this. So instead of doing a physically layered reading, I ended up just recording what I got, which has a different feel to it, frankly, than doing a layered reading where you've got all the decks set out and then you do it. Maybe because I had that testing intention. All right. Well, I'm going to leave it at that, so I'll be curious to hear if anybody has tester spreads of any kind. All right, take care, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.